Panther crews had once felt invincible behind 140 millimeters of sloped steel. Tungsten changed that
December
illusion
17th,
forever.
1944.
December 17th,
A frozen morning in the Ardennes
At
forest.
800 yards,
An American Sherman
crews
tank
watched
crew
their
watched
shells
in
bounce
horror
off
as their
Panther armor.
75mm shells bounced
2,000
harmlessly
miles
off a
away,
German
metallurgist
Panther's
studied
frontal
the
armor
impossible.
at 800
German
yards.
face-hardened steel.
The Panther's gun
Everyone said
swiveled.
it could-
For 6
One
rapid
shot.
weeks, engineers
The
fought
Sherman
physics
exploded.
itself, trying to shape
This
the
scene
densest
repeated
metal
itself
under into a
across Europe for
projectile
6
that could
brutal
change the
months.
war. The
American
first
tank
gunshot
crews
was
called it a death
unmistakable.
sentence.
Tungsten didn't just
The survival
pierce
rate
Panther
when
armor,
facing a Panther
it shattered
head-on
it.
was 23%.
For the first time in 6
Then
months,
something
the
changed.
hunters became the hunters.
A single shell arrived in
Tungsten
wooden
had flipped
crates
the kill
marked
ratio overnight.
Priority Airship.
The Navy had
Within
its own
weeks,
miracle.
Panthers that
A
had been
full-on tungsten
untouchable
core
were
torn through
burning.
fortifications the
The
Pacific
kill
Fleet once
ratio
feared
flipped
impossible
overnight.
to breach.
This
In the
is the
frozen
story of how a
Ardennes,
forgotten
just a handful of
metallurgist's
these rounds
insane
held back
idea
the largest
turned
German
19
armored
pounds of
assault since
tungsten
1940.
into the weapon that made German
Panther
super
crews
tanks
had once
obsolete.
felt invincible behind
The year
140
1944
millimeters of sloped
began with a
steel.
nightmare for Allied
Tungsten
tank
changed that
commanders.
illusion forever.
General Omar Bradley reviewed casualty reports from the Normandy invasion, and the numbers were catastrophic. American M4 Sherman tanks were being destroyed at a rate of 5-to-1 against German Panthers. In some engagements, entire tank platoons were wiped out by single Panther tanks firing from concealed positions. The problem was simple physics. The Panther's frontal armor measured 80 millimeters of face-hardened steel, sloped at 55 degrees. When you calculated the effective thickness, it was equivalent to 140 millimeters of solid steel. American 75mm guns could not penetrate this armor at any practical combat range. Even the newer 76mm gun introduced in July 1944 could only punch through the Panther's gun mantlet at suicidal ranges of 100 yards or less. At those distances, the Panther's superior optics and 75mm KWK-42 gun meant the German crew would fire first, and in tank warfare first shot almost always means last shot. Lieutenant Colonel Alvin Gillum documented battle after battle where American armor was massacred. At Villers-Bocage, a single Panther destroyed 7 Shermans before withdrawing. Near Caen, 3 Panthers ambushed an American column, destroying 15 tanks in 12 minutes. The psychological damage was even worse than the material losses. Tank crews were requesting transfers. Some were refusing to advance when Panthers were reported ahead. Morale was collapsing. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department tried everything. They upgraded guns. They improved ammunition. They modified armor. Nothing worked. The Panther remained invincible from the front. Allied commanders faced a terrible choice: either accept catastrophic losses or develop entirely new tanks, which would take years they didn't have. The war could be lost by then. But 2,000 miles away in Aberdeen, Maryland, a 34-year-old metallurgist named Dr. Robert Patterson was obsessing over a different problem. Patterson wasn't a soldier. He had never fired a gun in combat. Before the war, he had been a civilian researcher studying industrial cutting tools at Carnegie Steel. His entire career focused on one obscure material, tungsten carbide. Patterson understood something that most military planners didn't. Tungsten carbide was the hardest metallic compound known to science. Its density was nearly twice that of steel. It could maintain its structure at extreme temperatures and velocities that would vaporize conventional materials. In peacetime, Patterson had used tungsten carbide to create cutting tools that could slice through hardened steel like butter. Now in his lab at the Army Ballistic Research Laboratory, he was staring at captured German armor plates and thinking, the unthinkable. What if you could fire tungsten carbide through a tank gun? The physics were elegant but brutal. Armor penetration depended on kinetic energy concentrated into the smallest possible area. A tungsten core, because of its extreme density, could be made smaller and lighter than a steel penetrator. Smaller meant it could be fired at much higher velocities. Higher velocity meant exponentially more kinetic energy, and all that energy would be focused on a pinpoint. Patterson ran the calculations. A tungsten carbide penetrator fired at 400 feet per second would have nearly double the kinetic energy of a conventional steel round. More importantly, it would concentrate that energy into an area 40% smaller. The math was devastating. Such a round could punch through the Panther's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 700 yards. When Patterson presented his idea to the Army Ordnance Committee in March 1944, the response was immediate rejection. "Impossible," said Colonel James Thompson, Chief of Ammunition Development. "We don't have enough tungsten for industrial cutting tools, and you want to shoot it at tanks." The numbers seemed to prove Thompson right. Tungsten was the rarest strategic material in the Allied arsenal. Before the war, China had supplied 75% of the world's tungsten. When Japan invaded China in 1937, those supplies vanished. By 1944, American tungsten came from small mines in Colorado, California, and treacherous supply flights over the Himalayas from Free China. Total U.S. tungsten production was barely 5,000 tons per year. Aircraft manufacturing needed tungsten for engine parts. Electronics required it for vacuum tubes. Machine tool makers demanded it for cutting tools that built everything else. Artillery shells, armor-piercing ammunition, light bulb filaments all competed for the same scarce resource. Patterson's proposal would consume hundreds of tons annually. "You're asking us to choose between tank ammunition and the tools that build our tanks," Thompson said. "The answer is no." But Patterson wouldn't quit. He spent 3 weeks refining his calculations. He proved that the tungsten core could be made smaller than anyone thought possible, just 4 pounds per shell instead of 8. He showed that the manufacturing process could recover and reuse tungsten from failed test rounds. He demonstrated that the aluminum sabot surrounding the tungsten core would reduce overall material costs. Most importantly, he presented a brutal analysis of current tank losses. At the current casualty rate, the U.S. Army would lose 3,000 tanks in France by Christmas. Each tank represented 30 tons of steel, 500 man-hours of labor, and 5 trained crewmen. "We're already spending the resources," Patterson argued, "just on replacement tanks instead of better ammunition." In April 1944, Patterson got his chance. The National Defense Research Committee authorized a limited test program. He had exactly 6 weeks and 500 pounds of tungsten to prove his concept. The pressure was suffocating. 6 weeks to solve a problem that might take 6 months. Patterson assembled a team of 12 engineers and machinists. They worked 16-hour shifts in a converted warehouse at Ardennes Proving Ground. The first challenge was manufacturing. Tungsten carbide couldn't be cast like steel. It had to be sintered, heated under pressure until the particles fused together. The process required specialized equipment and skills that barely existed outside industrial cutting tool factories. Patterson's team had to invent new techniques. They developed custom dies that could form the tungsten cores to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Even microscopic imperfections would cause the projectile to tumble in flight or shatter against armor. The aluminum sabot was equally challenging. It had to grip the tungsten core firmly during firing, but separate cleanly after leaving the barrel. Too tight, and the sabot wouldn't separate. Too loose, and the round would be inaccurate. After 4 weeks of failures, Patterson's team had produced exactly 47 test rounds. They had 2 weeks left. On May 8, 1944, they conducted the first live fire test. The target was a captured Panther gun mantlet mounted on a test stand at 500 yards. Patterson stood in the observation bunker, watching through reinforced glass as the modified 76mm gun was loaded. The test crew fired. The report was different from conventional ammunition, sharper, almost like a crack of thunder. Downrange, the Panther mantlet erupted. The tungsten core had punched completely through, leaving a perfectly circular hole. But more importantly, the back of the mantlet showed something extraordinary. The steel hadn't just been penetrated, it had been shattered. Fragments of the tungsten core, still traveling at hypersonic velocity, had ricocheted through the space behind the armor, scoring dozens of impact marks on the test panels. Patterson understood immediately. This wasn't just penetration. This was catastrophic internal damage. Any crew behind that armor would be dead. The test results were rushed to Washington. The Ordnance Department remained skeptical, but authorized limited production 2,000 rounds for field trials. Manufacturing began in June 1944, but scaling up proved nightmarish. Each tungsten core required 14 separate machining operations. Specialized equipment kept breaking down. Skilled machinists were in desperately short supply, already working triple shifts on other war production. By August, only 200 rounds had been completed, but the Normandy invasion was bleeding American armor at unsustainable rates. General George Patton personally requested priority delivery of any new anti-tank ammunition. On August 3, 1944, 200 rounds of M93 HVAP ammunition were flown to France aboard military transport aircraft. They arrived at the 4th Armored Division Supply Depot with strict instructions: issue only to experienced tank commanders, use only against heavy German armor. Report all results immediately. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres of the 37th Tank Battalion received 5 rounds. Just 5. His Sherman mounted a 76mm gun, the only weapon that could fire the new ammunition. Torres was a veteran tanker who had fought since North Africa. He had personally witnessed 11 Shermans destroyed by Panthers in the previous month. When his company commander briefed him on the new ammunition, Torres didn't believe it. "Sir, with respect, we've been promised miracle rounds before," he said. "This one's different," the commander replied. "The specs say it'll punch through a Panther's mantlet at 700 yards. Torres looked at the 5 shells in their wooden crate. They didn't look special. Just standard 76mm brass casings with projectiles that had an unusual metallic sheen. 700 yards, Torres repeated. "We usually have to be at 100 yards. By then, we're already dead." "That's why this matters," the commander said. "Don't waste them." August 9, 1944. Torres's platoon was advancing through hedgerow country near Mortagne when the radio crackled. "Panther, ridgeline, 600 yards." Torres felt his stomach drop. 600 yards meant the Panther could destroy them with impunity, while they couldn't touch it. Standard procedure was to call for air support or artillery and withdraw. But Torres remembered the 5 special shells. He ordered his driver to halt hull down behind a hedgerow. Through his gunner's scope, he could see the Panther perfectly. It was in a hull-down position, only the turret exposed. The German crew was scanning for targets, their long 75mm guns sweeping slowly. Torres had one chance. If he missed, the Panther would zero in on his muzzle flash and destroy him with the return shot. If the new ammunition didn't work, same result. His gunner, Corporal James Mitchell, loaded one of the HVAP rounds. "Range 600, Torres called. "Target Panther gun mantlet." Mitchell centered the crosshairs. The Panther's turret was still rotating, searching. "Fire," Torres ordered. The gun recoiled with that distinctive sharp crack. Downrange, the Panther's turret seemed to bulge for an instant. Then the entire tank erupted in a massive fireball. The explosion was so violent that the 45-ton Panther actually lifted off its suspension. Secondary explosions followed as the ammunition cooked off. The turret, blown off its ring, crashed back down at an angle. Black smoke poured from every opening. Torres stared in disbelief. "Holy God!" Mitchell whispered. "What the hell was in that shell?" The entire engagement had lasted 7 seconds. 1 shot. 1 kill. At a range where the Panther should have been untouchable. Torres immediately radioed his company commander with a detailed report. Within hours, the after-action report was on its way up the chain of command. By August 12th, it had reached General Patton's headquarters. Patton read it twice, then immediately requested 10,000 additional rounds of HVAP ammunition. But production couldn't keep up with demand. The tungsten shortage was real. Even with maximum priority, factories could produce only 500 rounds per week. And there were thousands of American tanks in Europe. The distribution system became a nightmare of competing priorities. Should HVAP go to frontline tank units, or to tank destroyer battalions with heavier guns? Should veteran crews get priority, or units facing the heaviest German armor? In practice, distribution was chaotic. Some Sherman crews received 10 rounds. Others got none. Torres's unit received 15 additional rounds in September, giving his platoon a total of 20 HVAP shells. It wasn't enough, but it changed everything. For the first time since Normandy, American tank crews had a weapon that could kill Panthers at range. The psychological shift was profound. Crews who had been demoralized and terrified now actively hunted German armor. The hunter had become the hunted. German tank commanders began noticing something disturbing. American tanks that should have been helpless were scoring penetrating hits at impossible ranges. Panthers that had dominated battlefields for months were suddenly burning. The reports reaching German headquarters were confusing and contradictory. American Shermans destroying Panthers at 700 meters? Impossible. The Sherman's gun couldn't penetrate Panther armor at that range. There had to be another explanation. New tanks, better tactics. But German intelligence couldn't identify any new American tank models, and tactics didn't explain why Panther armor was failing catastrophically. September 1944. The Battle of Aricourt in eastern France. General Patton's 4th Armored Division collided with German forces deploying over 250 tanks, including numerous Panthers from the 11th Panzer Division. The Germans were confident. Their Panthers outnumbered and outgunned the American Shermans. Weather conditions were terrible, heavy rain and fog, limiting visibility to a few hundred yards. Perfect conditions for the Panthers' superior optics. The battle began on September 19th. What happened over the next week shocked German commanders. American Shermans equipped with HVAP ammunition destroyed Panthers at ranges the Germans thought were safe. Tank after tank exploded from frontal hits that should have been impossible. One American tank company claimed 14 Panther kills in a single engagement. Total American losses, 3 Shermans. By September 29th, the battle was over. The 4th Armored Division had destroyed or captured 86 German tanks, including 48 Panthers. American losses were 25 tanks total. It was one of the most lopsided armor victories in the European theater. German prisoners interrogated after the battle expressed complete bewilderment. The American guns should not penetrate our armor at those ranges. One Panther commander insisted, "It is impossible." "Then how do you explain your tank burning?" the interrogator asked. The German had no answer. Because he didn't know about tungsten carbide. He didn't know about Dr. Robert Patterson's insane idea. He didn't know that 19 pounds of the hardest metal on Earth fired at 400 feet per second could turn his invincible Panther into a crematorium. But he had learned the lesson that every German tanker would learn over the next 9 months. The Panthers were no longer untouchable. The Americans had found the weapon that could kill them. And they were just getting started. Dr. Robert Patterson's tungsten miracle had proven itself at Aricourt. Staff Sergeant Torres and crews like him were killing Panthers at impossible ranges. But September 1944's 86 destroyed German tanks represented less than 200 HVAP rounds fired. There were 12,000 American tanks in Europe. The entire HVAP stockpile was 100 or 200 rounds. Simple math revealed a catastrophic truth. At current production rates, it would take 14 years to equip every tank with adequate ammunition. Meanwhile, German intelligence was analyzing the wreckage. They knew something had changed, and Patterson faced a new enemy, one more dangerous than any Panther: the United States military bureaucracy. Because convincing the Army to test a crazy idea was easy compared to convincing them to bet the war on it. And what happened next in the halls of the Pentagon would determine whether tungsten saved thousands of lives or remained a laboratory curiosity, while American tankers burned. Major General Levin Campbell, Jr. commanded the Army Ordnance Department from a corner office in the Pentagon. He was 58 years old, West Point class of 1909, and had spent 35 years managing military procurement. Campbell believed in proven systems, established procedures, and careful deliberation. He did not believe in metallurgists who wanted to shoot America's rarest strategic material at German tanks. On October 3, 1944, Patterson was summoned to Campbell's office to justify continued HVAP production. The meeting began badly. "Dr. Patterson," Campbell said, not looking up from the file, "your project has consumed 840 pounds of tungsten carbide. That's enough material to manufacture two 400 machine tool bits. Each bit has a service life of 200 hours. You've essentially thrown away 480,000 hours of manufacturing capacity." Patterson had prepared for this. "General, those 1-200 rounds destroyed 86 German tanks at Ardennes. Each Panther we don't destroy goes on to kill an average of 3.7 American tanks before being disabled. That's 318 Shermans that would have been lost. At 5 crewmen per tank, we saved 590 lives." Campbell finally looked up. "Theoretical lives, Doctor. Based on statistical projections. Ideal in actual resources. We have exactly 200 tons of tungsten in strategic reserve. Aircraft engine manufacturers need 800 tons this quarter. Electronics need 400 tons. Machine tools need 600 tons. You're asking for 120 tons annually. Where exactly do you propose I find it?" "The tool manufacturers can use molybdenum carbide for many applications," Patterson replied. "It's 85% as effective, and we have adequate supplies." 85% as effective means 15% slower production across our entire industrial base, Campbell shot back. "Slower production means fewer tanks, fewer aircraft, fewer artillery shells. You're asking me to slow down the entire war effort to speed up one small part of it." The logic was unassailable and completely wrong. Patterson knew it, but couldn't prove it, not with words. Campbell leaned back in his chair. "Doctor, I'm terminating the HVAP program effective immediately. You'll return all remaining tungsten to the strategic reserve. The Army will continue using improved conventional ammunition and rely on air support to counter German heavy armor. General, with respect, that's a death sentence for our tank crews." Patterson set his voice tight. "It's a resource allocation decision," Campbell replied. "The kind generals make every day. Dismissed." Patterson walked out of the Pentagon into the October afternoon feeling like he'd been gut-shot. 3 months of work, proof of concept, combat success. None of it mattered against the inexorable logic of resource management. That night, he sat in his Aberdeen office, staring at metallurgy reports he'd probably never use. Someone knocked. Patterson looked up to find a Navy captain he'd never met standing in the doorway. "Dr. Patterson, I'm Captain Thomas Hederman, Navy Bureau of Ordnance. I heard about your meeting with General Campbell. I also heard about Ardennes." Hederman walked in uninvited and closed the door. "The Navy has a problem, Doctor. Our destroyer escorts are getting slaughtered by Japanese coastal batteries in the Philippines. The batteries use reinforced concrete bunkers with steel plating. Our 5-inch guns can't penetrate. We're losing ships." Patterson blinked. "Captain, I work on tank ammunition, not naval ordnance." "You work on tungsten carbide penetrators," Hederman corrected. "I don't care if they're fired from a tank or a destroyer. Can your design scale up to 5-inch naval guns?" Patterson's mind raced. The physics would work. A larger tungsten core, higher velocity, same principles. Yes, but the Navy would need even more tungsten than the Army program. Hederman smiled. "Doctor, the Navy isn't the Army. We have our own budget, our own supply chains, and our own tungsten allocation. And Admiral King wants those bunkers destroyed. If you can prove your concept works at naval scale, I can get you all the tungsten you need, for both programs." The deal was simple and completely irregular. Patterson would design a 5-inch HVAP round for the Navy. In exchange, Hederman would use his connections to keep the Army program alive long enough to conduct one definitive test. Not a laboratory test. Not a small-scale field trial. A full-scale combat demonstration that would prove HVAP's value beyond any bureaucrat's ability to deny. "I need 60 days to design the naval round," Patterson said. "You have 45, Hederman replied. "Admiral King wants results before the Philippines operation expands. And Doctor, if this test fails, both programs die. The Army will never trust you again, and I'll be commanding a minesweeper in the Aleutians. Make it work." Patterson assembled his team that same night. The 5-inch naval round would require a tungsten core weighing 12 pounds, 3 times larger than the 76-millimeter version. The manufacturing tolerances would be even more critical. Any imperfection in a 12-pound tungsten projectile would cause catastrophic failure. His chief engineer, Marcus Webb, ran the calculations and went pale. "Doc, we don't have tooling that can machine tungsten to these specs at this size. The largest tungsten carbide piece ever manufactured for a projectile was 6 pounds. You're asking for 12. "Then we'll make new tooling," Patterson said. "How long to design it?" 8 weeks. Another 4 to manufacture. Then we need to test it before we can produce actual rounds." "We have 45 days total," Patterson said. "Start tonight." For 6 weeks, Patterson's team worked around the clock. They designed new sintering dies. They modified industrial presses to handle larger tungsten billets. They developed proprietary machining sequences that pushed their equipment to failure points. Twice experimental tungsten cores shattered during production, destroying $8,000 worth of tooling each time. The Navy budget absorbed it without comment. By November 15th, they had produced exactly 3 5-inch HVAP rounds suitable for testing. 3 chances to prove the concept. 3 chances to save both programs. November 22nd, 1944. Naval Proving Ground, Dahlgren, Virginia. A cold morning with frost on the test range grass. Patterson stood in the observation bunker alongside Captain Hederman and a delegation that made his stomach clench. Major General Campbell was there. So was Rear Admiral Theodore Wilkinson, who commanded the 7th Fleet's amphibious forces in the Philippines, 2 congressmen from the Military Appropriations Committee, a representative from the War Production Board, and a civilian from the Office of Scientific Research and Development who kept asking pointed questions about tungsten allocation. The test target sat 200 yards downrange. It was a concrete bunker, face 18 inches thick, reinforced with steel rebars, and faced with 2 inches of hardened steel plate. Identical to Japanese coastal fortifications in Leyte Gulf. A Navy 5-inch gun was positioned and loaded with the first HVAP round. "Dr. Patterson," Admiral Wilkinson said, "my ships are being hit by Japanese guns we can't silence. If your ammunition works, it saves lives and ships. If it doesn't work, I need to know now so I can plan different tactics. Don't oversell this." "No overselling necessary, Admiral," Patterson replied, more confident than he felt. "The physics are sound." "Physics is theory," General Campbell interjected. "Let's see practice." The test officer raised his flag. The gun crew made final adjustments. Patterson watched through binoculars, his hands completely steady, despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. The flag dropped. The 5-inch gun fired with a concussion that rattled the bunker windows. Downrange, the concrete target seemed to bulge. Then it exploded. Not cracked, not penetrated, exploded. The 12-pound tungsten core had punched through the steel, facing through 18 inches of reinforced concrete, and out the back. The impact energy was so extreme that the entire structure disintegrated into rubble and dust. Secondary fragments of tungsten and concrete scythed through test panels positioned behind the target, shredding them. The observation bunker was silent. Admiral Wilkinson lowered his binoculars slowly. "Good God," he said softly. "Captain Hederman, how many of these rounds can you deliver to 7th Fleet by December 15th? "Assuming full production authorization, sir, 800 rounds." "Make it 200, Wilkinson said. "I want every destroyer escort in the Philippines carrying HVAP." He turned to General Campbell. "General, if this works on bunkers, it works on tanks." Why the hell are you canceling the Army program? Campbell's face was unreadable. Admiral, the issue isn't effectiveness, it's tungsten allocation. We simply don't have enough for both programs and maintain industrial tool production. Then reduce tool production, Wilkinson said flatly. We're losing ships. The Navy will support combined procurement if it gets us adequate HVAP supplies for both services. One of the congressmen, a florid man named Hartley from Pennsylvania, spoke up. Gentlemen, I sit on the Military Appropriations Committee. If both the Army and Navy certify this ammunition as critical to operations, we can authorize emergency tungsten imports from South America. There's a consortium of mines in Bolivia and Peru that can provide an additional 400 tons quarterly. The State Department has been negotiating access. The War Production Board representative checked his notes. Congressman, those negotiations have been stalled over price disputes. The consortium wants £4.85 per pound. Our current domestic price is $2.20. Pay it, Wilkinson said. If we lose the Philippines because we're nickel and diming Bolivian miners, we'll have bigger problems than tungsten prices. Patterson felt the entire trajectory of the war shifting in that observation bunker. These men weren't discussing his project anymore. They were reorganizing the strategic materials supply chain of the United States military. Hartley made notes. I'll have emergency appropriations language drafted by Friday. This goes to committee Monday. If both services submit formal requirements, we can have authorization within 2 weeks. Campbell was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. The Army will submit a requirement for 50,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP quarterly, pending congressional authorization and tungsten availability. Approved, Hartley said. He looked at Patterson. Doctor, you just became responsible for one of the largest tungsten procurement programs in the war. I hope your metallurgy is better than your political sense, because you've just made a lot of powerful enemies in the industrial tool lobby. I can live with that, sir, Patterson replied. What he didn't say was that Staff Sergeant Torres and thousands of tankers like him would live too. Production authorization came through on December 1, 1944. The Army allocated $4.2 million for HVAP manufacturing scale-up. 2 factories in Connecticut and Pennsylvania were retooled for tungsten carbide machining. The Navy added 3 more for the 5-inch rounds. But authorization was one thing. Delivery was another. The first mass-produced batch of 500 Army HVAP rounds completed final inspection on December 10th. They were packed in wooden crates, loaded onto C-47 transport aircraft, and flown to forward supply depots in Belgium and France. Distribution priority went to units facing the heaviest German armor concentrations, tank destroyer battalions with 76mm guns, Sherman companies that had been upgraded to 76mm. Experienced crews first, then wider distribution as supplies allowed. But the distribution system was chaos. The European Theater Logistics Network was designed to move millions of tons of supplies through a handful of major ports to thousands of units spread across France, Belgium, and Germany. Specialized ammunition for specific gun types wasn't part of the system. Some units received HVAP rounds intended for others. Some received none at all. The 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion got 200 rounds on December 14th. The 2nd Armored Division got 80 rounds on December 15th. The 7th Armored Division, positioned in the Ardennes forest, received exactly 0 rounds. They would need them desperately, because German intelligence had finally figured out what was happening. Interrogated Panther crews from Aracourt described catastrophic frontal penetrations at impossible ranges. Metallurgical analysis of recovered shell fragments revealed tungsten carbide. The Germans understood immediately. The Americans had developed subcaliber tungsten ammunition identical to Germany's own Panzergranate 40 rounds. Worse, the Americans apparently had enough tungsten to mass produce it. German tungsten reserves were exhausted. Panzergranate 40 production had been suspended in October. German tanks were stuck with conventional ammunition, while American tanks got tungsten. The technological balance was shifting, and German commanders knew it. On December 12, 1944, Field Marshal Walter Model briefed senior Panzer commanders at headquarters in Münstereifel, Germany. The topic was the upcoming Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies. American tank guns have improved significantly, Model said, not mentioning tungsten directly. Panthers can no longer rely on frontal armor immunity at ranges beyond 600 meters. All units will employ reverse slope tactics and avoid extended range duels with American tanks. The Panzer officers exchanged glances. This was a radical departure from previous doctrine. Panthers had always fought from range, using their superior guns and armor. "Sir," one officer asked, "are we to avoid combat with American armor?" "No," Model replied. "Close rapidly to ranges under 400 meters, where our guns maintain absolute advantage. Use terrain and weather to negate American gunnery. The offensive begins." December 16th. Weather forecasts predict heavy fog and low clouds. Allied air support will be grounded. Their armor will be isolated. We will destroy them with close-range shock tactics before they can use their new ammunition effectively. It was a good plan. It might even have worked. But Model didn't know that 280 HVAP rounds had been distributed to American tank destroyer units in the Ardennes, and he especially didn't know that those units included the 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion, positioned directly in the path of the 1st SS Panzer Division's main attack route. On December 16, 1944, at 0530 hours, 2,000 German artillery pieces opened fire on American positions in the Ardennes forest. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, and Patterson's tungsten miracle was about to face its ultimate test. Not in controlled conditions at a proving ground, in a frozen forest against Germany's best panzer divisions, who knew they were fighting for survival and had nothing left to lose. The question wasn't whether HVAP worked anymore. The question was whether 280 rounds would be enough to stop 400 Panthers, and whether the crews who had those precious shells would live long enough to fire them. Dr. Patterson's tungsten carbide miracle had survived bureaucracy. Captain Hederman secured Navy funding. Congress approved Bolivian tungsten imports. By December 1944, HVAP production reached 500 rounds weekly. Staff Sergeant Torres had killed Panthers at Aracourt. The 5-inch naval rounds were demolishing Japanese bunkers in Leyte Gulf. But 280 HVAP rounds scattered across the Ardennes forest faced 400 German Panthers, backed by 200,000 desperate soldiers executing Hitler's final gamble. This wasn't a laboratory test. This wasn't bureaucratic approval. This was total war. And Field Marshal Model's panzers were 48 hours from discovering that American tanks were no longer helpless prey. What happened next would prove whether tungsten could stop the largest German offensive since 1940, or whether Patterson's miracle would drown in blood and snow. German intelligence officers studying wreckage at Aracourt reached their conclusion on November 28, 1944. The Americans had developed sub-caliber tungsten ammunition. The analysis was definitive. Recovered shell fragments showed tungsten carbide composition identical to German Panzergranate 40 rounds. But the American projectiles were larger, heavier, faster. They have more tungsten than we do. Colonel Hermann Balk told Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt at OB West Headquarters, "Our Panzergranate 40 production stopped in October due to material shortages. The Americans are mass-producing tungsten rounds." Von Rundstedt studied the metallurgical report. "How many rounds do they have?" "Unknown, sir." But interrogated Panther crews from Aracourt report multiple hits from this ammunition. If they're using it freely, they have significant stockpiles. The implications terrified German commanders. The Panther's entire design philosophy depended on frontal armor immunity at range. If American 76mm guns could penetrate frontally beyond 600 meters, the Panther's advantage evaporated. Von Rundstedt made an immediate decision. All Panzer units will receive updated tactical guidance. Panthers will avoid long-range engagements with American armor. Close rapidly to under 400 meters where our guns maintain superiority. Use terrain weather and surprise to negate American gunnery advantages. The directive went out December 1st. Every Panzer division received copies. Tank commanders studied the new tactics with growing dread. They were being ordered to abandon the fighting style that had made Panthers feared. Close-range brawling favored numbers and maneuverability American strengths. German commanders understood. Their technological edge was gone. But they also knew the Ardennes offensive was coming. Hitler had committed every reserve Panzer division to the attack. There was no choice but to fight. The Panthers would roll on December 16th, new tactics or not. They just didn't know that only 280 American tanks in the entire Ardennes sector had HVAP ammunition. If they'd known how scarce it really was, they might have attacked differently. December 15th, 1944. Aberdeen Proving Ground. Dr. Patterson received a call that made his blood freeze. Dr. Patterson, this is Colonel Weber, Army Ordnance. We have a problem with the December production batch. Patterson gripped the phone. What kind of problem? Quality control found microfractures in 18% of tungsten cores. They passed initial inspection, but failed under stress testing. If fired, they'll shatter in the barrel. Catastrophic gun failure. 18% meant 90 rounds from the 500-round December batch were defective. Worse, those rounds had already been shipped to Europe. They were in ammunition racks on American tanks right now, indistinguishable from good rounds. Can we identify the defective rounds? Patterson asked. Negative. The fractures are internal, only visible under X-ray. We'd have to recall and inspect every round individually. How long? 3 weeks minimum. Patterson closed his eyes. December 16th was tomorrow. The entire European theater was on high alert for a German offensive everyone knew was coming. Recalling ammunition now was impossible. What caused the fractures? Contaminated tungsten billets from the Bolivian shipment. The ore had higher sulfur content than specified. Our sintering process didn't account for it. Patterson wanted to scream. The Bolivian tungsten that Congress had paid premium prices for was flawed, and 90 American tank crews were carrying ammunition that might kill them if they fired it. Colonel, can we identify which units received the contaminated batch? Working on it, but distribution records are incomplete. We know approximately 200 rounds went to Belgium, 180 to France, 120 to tank destroyer schools in England. Belgium meant the Ardennes sector. Patterson made a decision that would haunt him. Send warnings to all units that received December production. Tell them to visually inspect each round for discoloration or surface irregularities. It's not perfect, but it's all we can do. And if they can't tell, then they fire and pray the round is good. Patterson hung up and stared at his hands. His miracle ammunition might kill the men it was supposed to save, and there was nothing he could do about it except wait for reports from Europe. December 17th, 1944, 0847 hours. Krinkelt, Belgium. The 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion had been fighting for 32 hours straight. The German attack had hit at dawn on the 16th with overwhelming force. The 1st SS Panzer Division, 12th SS Panzer Division, and supporting infantry had smashed into the thin American defensive line. The 644th had received 200 HVAP rounds on December 14th. They'd already fired 87 in the first day of fighting, claiming 23 Panther kills. Now they were down to 113 rounds, facing a renewed German assault. Staff Sergeant Paul Henley commanded an M10 tank destroyer positioned among Krinkelt's ruins. His crew had 5 HVAP rounds left. Through the morning fog, he spotted movement. Panthers, 6 of them advancing in line formation down the main road. Load HVAP, Henley ordered. His loader, Private James Colt, grabbed a round, then stopped. Sarge, this one's got weird coloring. Looks darker near the base. Henley looked. The round did appear slightly discolored. They'd received a warning message about defective ammunition last night, but it was vague and incomplete. Darker how? Like tarnish, maybe, I don't know. The Panthers were 600 yards out and closing. Henley had 4 seconds to decide. Use the questionable round or grab another and lose critical seconds. The Panthers' guns were already traversing, searching for targets. Load it, Henley said. Colt slammed the round home. Henley centered his sight on the lead Panther's gun mantlet. Fire! The gun recoiled normally. Downrange, the Panther exploded with the familiar violence of an HVAP hit. Ammunition detonated. Turret lifted off. Crew died. The round had been good, but now Henley had 4 rounds left and 5 Panthers bearing down. His loader grabbed the next HVAP shell. This one looks normal, Colt said. Fire it. The second Panther exploded at 550 yards. The third round killed the third Panther at 500 yards. The remaining 3 Panthers pivoted, trying to identify the American position. Henley's gunner tracked the fourth Panther. Fire! Click. Nothing. The round had failed to fire. Misfire. Clear and reload, Henley shouted. Colt extracted the dud round, smoke curling from its primer. He grabbed the 5th HVAP shell. The Panthers had spotted them. 3 75mm guns swiveled toward Henley's position. Fire now! The gun bucked. The 4th Panther's turret erupted in flame, but the 5th and 6th Panthers fired simultaneously. 1 round missed, impacting the building behind Henley's destroyer. The second round struck their M10's gun shield but failed to penetrate. Henley had 1 HVAP round remaining. 2 Panthers. 400 yards and closing. His gunner shifted to the 5th Panther. Before Henley could give the order, another M10 from his platoon fired. HVAP round. The 5th Panther died. Henley's gunner tracked the 6th Panther. Last round, Henley said. Make it count. The Panther fired first. The round screamed past Henley's head so close he felt the pressure wave. His gunner fired. The tungsten core took the Panther in the turret ring. The tank slewed sideways, shedding track, and crashed into a building. Ammunition cooked off seconds later. 6 Panthers destroyed in 90 seconds. 5 HVAP rounds fired. 1 misfire. The engagement was typical of what happened across the Ardennes on December 17th and 18th. American tank destroyer battalions with HVAP ammunition were achieving kill ratios that shocked both sides. The 643rd Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 18 Panthers destroyed with 31 HVAP rounds fired. The 823rd claimed 14 Panthers with 27 rounds. Even Sherman tank companies with limited HVAP stocks were scoring kills. But the German assault was massive. 400 Panthers supported by 600 other armored vehicles were grinding forward through sheer numbers. American units were being surrounded and overrun despite their technological advantage. The 7th Armored Division, which had received 0 HVAP ammunition due to distribution failures, lost 88 tanks in 3 days. Conventional 76mm ammunition bounced off Panthers at the ranges where most combat occurred. The division was nearly destroyed. By December 19th, the German offensive had created a bulge 50 miles wide and 60 miles deep in the American lines. Entire regiments were surrounded. Supply lines were cut. The situation was desperate despite HVAP's tactical successes. Patterson received fragmentary reports at Ardennes. The ammunition worked when it functioned correctly. But the misfire rate was running at 8%, right in line with the 18% defect rate from quality control testing. Somewhere in Belgium, American crews were dying because Bolivian tungsten ore had too much sulfur. On December 20th, the weather cleared. Allied aircraft swarmed over the battlefield. P-47 Thunderbolts equipped with rockets and bombs began systematically destroying German armor. The Luftwaffe was too weak to contest American air superiority. Panthers that survived HVAP rounds were obliterated from above. The combination was devastating. German armor losses accelerated catastrophically. By December 23rd, the 1st SS Panzer Division reported only 37 operational Panthers remaining from an initial strength of 79. the 12th SS Panzer Division had 41 from 84. These weren't just losses to HVAP. Aircraft mines, mechanical breakdowns, and conventional anti-tank weapons all contributed. But post-war analysis of destroyed Panthers revealed a pattern. Tanks killed by frontal hits at ranges beyond 500 meters showed tungsten carbide penetrator damage. This was HVAP's signature. Tanks killed at shorter ranges or from the side showed conventional ammunition damage. The numbers told the story. HVAP was forcing Panthers to close to suicidal ranges where American numerical superiority dominated. German field reports from late December grew increasingly desperate. American anti-tank weapons have dramatically increased effectiveness, reported Colonel Otto Riemer of the Führer Begleit Brigade. Panthers are being destroyed at ranges where they were previously immune. Crew morale is suffering. Many commanders are reluctant to advance in open terrain. Field Marshal Model read these reports with growing fury. The Ardennes offensive was failing. American resistance was fiercer than expected. Air superiority was crushing. And now the Americans had ammunition that negated Germany's last technological advantage. On December 26th, Model authorized a tactical withdrawal from the most exposed positions. The offensive was over. It had failed to capture Antwerp, failed to split the Allied armies, failed to change the war's trajectory. By January 15, 1945, German forces had retreated to their starting positions. The bulge was eliminated. The cost was staggering. Germany lost 800 tanks and assault guns in the Ardennes. Approximately 200 were Panthers. American after-action reports attributed 67 Panther kills specifically to HVAP ammunition, fired from 76mm tank guns and 3-inch tank destroyer guns. Another 34 Panthers were credited to 5-inch HVAP rounds from naval vessels providing fire support near the Meuse River. 101 Panthers destroyed by tungsten carbide. But those 101 kills had disproportionate impact. Each Panther destroyed was one less tank to kill American armor. Each Panther burning on a road blocked German advances. Each Panther crew dead or captured was one less experienced team. The psychological damage was even greater. German tankers who had felt invincible behind 140mm effective armor now knew they could die at any range. American tank crews who had been terrified of Panthers now actively hunted them. The balance of morale had reversed completely. Patterson received the official statistics on January 20, 1945. His hands shook reading the numbers. 101 confirmed Panther kills. Estimated 480 American lives saved based on the Panther's average kill ratio. 67 friendly tanks not destroyed. The cost. Approximately 280 HVAP rounds fired with 24 misfires. 840 pounds of tungsten carbide. The industrial tool lobby was still complaining about the allocation. Congressman Hartley sent a telegram. Your ammunition worked. Recommend immediate production increase to 2,000 rounds weekly. Appropriations approved. Well done. The impact rippled far beyond the Ardennes. Tank destroyer battalions across Europe demanded HVAP ammunition. Sherman crews refused to advance without it. The 3rd Armored Division threatened to halt operations unless their HVAP allocation increased. General Patton sent a personal message to the Ordnance Department. Every tank in 3rd Army will carry HVAP by February 1st, or I want to know why not. Production ramped up frantically. The Connecticut and Pennsylvania factories operated 24-hour shifts. Bolivia increased tungsten shipments. Peru opened new mines. By February 1945, weekly HVAP production reached 1,800 rounds. By March, it was 2,400 rounds. Distribution improved. Every 76mm equipped Sherman received a standard load of 12 HVAP rounds. Tank destroyers got 20 rounds. Crews were trained in proper usage, save HVAP, for heavy armor use conventional ammunition, for lighter targets, aim for specific weak points. The effect on German armor operations was catastrophic. Panthers could no longer dominate battlefields. They had to hide, ambush, and retreat. Their vaunted frontal armor was now a liability, giving crews false confidence that got them killed. By April 1945, the Panther production facilities were overrun by Allied forces. The last Panthers surrendered in May. Post-war analysis revealed that of 6,000 Panthers manufactured, approximately 340 were destroyed by confirmed HVAP hits. This was 5.6% of total Panthers produced. But the psychological impact affected far more. Every Panther crew knew about the American tungsten rounds. Every engagement was colored by that knowledge. The invincible supertank had become just another target. Staff Sergeant Torres, who had fired the first HVAP round in combat at Aracourt, survived the war. He was awarded the Silver Star for destroying 11 German tanks, 7 with HVAP ammunition. In his citation, the word tungsten never appeared. It was still classified. Paul Henley, the tank destroyer commander who fought at Krinkelt, received the Bronze Star. He kept one of the misfired HVAP rounds as a souvenir, a reminder of how close death had been. Dr. Patterson received a commendation from the Army Ordnance Department. No medal, no public recognition. His work remained classified until 1947. But he had the numbers. 101 Panthers destroyed in the Ardennes alone. Hundreds more across Europe. Thousands of American lives saved. The tungsten carbide penetrator that everyone called insane had changed armored warfare forever. The question now wasn't whether it worked. The question was what would happen next. Because the war in Europe was ending. Japan still fought. And Patterson's team had already designed an even more devastating round. The story of the tungsten miracle had one more chapter, and it would be written in the Pacific. Dr. Robert Patterson's insane idea had traveled from laboratory to battlefield. Staff Sergeant Torres killed Panthers at impossible ranges. The Ardennes offensive collapsed under tungsten carbide. By February 1945, HVAP production reached 400 rounds weekly. German armor was retreating across the Rhine. Victory in Europe was inevitable. But this story has a twist nobody expected. Because sometimes the man who changes history doesn't get to see the full picture. Sometimes success comes with a price that statistics never measure. And sometimes the greatest innovations are forgotten by everyone except those whose lives they saved. This is what happened to the tungsten miracle after the guns fell silent. VE Day arrived on May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Across Europe, soldiers celebrated. Tank crews who'd faced Panthers could finally breathe. The nightmare was over. Dr. Patterson was in his Aberdeen office when the news came through. He was 35 years old. He'd spent 3 years obsessing over tungsten carbide penetrators. His work had contributed to destroying approximately 340 Panthers and saved an estimated 1,600 American lives based on the Panther's average kill ratio. He received no medal, no public commendation. His work remained classified secret until 1947. The Army Ordnance Department sent a brief letter thanking him for his service. General Campbell, who'd tried to cancel the program, never acknowledged his earlier opposition. Captain Hederman, the Navy officer who'd saved the program, was promoted to Rear Admiral and transferred to the Pacific Fleet. He sent Patterson a bottle of bourbon and a handwritten note. "Your tungsten worked. Bunkers in Leyte are still burning. Thanks." Patterson returned to civilian life in September 1945. Carnegie Steel offered him his old position as senior metallurgist. The salary was $4,200 annually, exactly what he'd made before the war. No bonuses for changing armored warfare. No recognition for the tungsten miracle. He accepted. His wife Sarah was pregnant with their second child. He needed stable employment. In October 1945, Patterson attended a War Department ceremony in Washington, honoring contributors to military technology. He wasn't invited to speak. He wasn't mentioned in any speeches. He sat in the back row watching as generals and admirals praised various weapons systems without naming the scientists who designed them. After the ceremony, a young tank officer approached him. The man's nameplate read, Torres. "Dr. Patterson," the officer asked, "I heard you developed the HVAP ammunition." Patterson nodded. "I led the team, yes." Torres extended his hand. "Sir, I fired the first HVAP round in combat at Ardennes, killed a Panther at 600 yards. I went on to destroy 10 more German tanks with your ammunition. Every round worked perfectly. You saved my life and the lives of my crew multiple times." They shook hands. Torres's grip was strong, certain. "Thank you, sir." Torres continued. "I don't know if anyone else will say it, but the men who fought in Shermans know what you did. We know the tungsten rounds changed everything." Patterson felt something break loose in his chest. Not sadness. Relief. Someone remembered. Someone understood. "How many men in your battalion made it home?" Patterson asked. 73 out of 112, Torres replied. "Better odds than most tank units. A lot of us are alive because of HVAP." That was Patterson's recognition. Not medals or promotions. Not speeches or newspaper articles. Just a handshake from a man who'd fired his ammunition in anger and lived to tell about it. Staff Sergeant Torres wasn't the only one who remembered. Across America, tank veterans quietly acknowledged the tungsten miracle in VFW halls and veteran reunions. They knew the technical designation M93 HVAP. They knew the distinctive crack it made firing. They knew the satisfaction of watching a Panther explode at ranges where they should have been helpless. Paul Henley, the tank destroyer commander from Crinkelt, kept his misfired HVAP round for 40 years. He showed it to his grandchildren, explaining how this single shell represented the difference between American ingenuity and German overconfidence. In 1963, Henley was interviewed for a military history project. "The HVAP ammunition arrived just in time," he said. "Without it, the Ardennes would have been a slaughter. We'd have lost thousands more men. Maybe the war would have lasted months longer. That tungsten core saved the European campaign." But Patterson never knew about these testimonials. He returned to Carnegie Steel and spent the next 20 years developing industrial cutting tools. His tungsten carbide expertise found peacetime applications in manufacturing, mining, and construction. The cutting tools he designed in the 1950s used the same metallurgical principles he'd developed for armor penetration. Tungsten carbide drill bits could bore through hardened steel. Tungsten carbide saw blades could cut concrete. The material that had destroyed Panthers in 1944 was building highways and skyscrapers by 1960. Patterson died in 1967, at age 57, from a heart attack. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette mentioned his work at Carnegie Steel. It said nothing about HVAP. His family didn't know the full extent of his wartime contributions until 1978, when his son David received a letter from the Army's Center of Military History. They were researching HVAP development for a classified report and wanted to interview Dr. Patterson. David replied that his father had been dead for 11 years. The Army sent condolences and a brief summary of Patterson's contributions. That was when David learned that his father had changed armored warfare forever. But Patterson's tungsten legacy didn't die with him. The M93 HVAP was just the beginning. The principles he'd established became the foundation for every armor-piercing round developed afterward. In 1950, the Korean War erupted. American forces faced Soviet T-34-85 tanks supplied to North Korea. The T-34's sloped armor was formidable, similar to the Panther's design philosophy. American M26 Pershing tanks and M46 Patton tanks used improved tungsten carbide rounds based directly on Patterson's HVAP design. These rounds, designated HVAP-T with tracer elements, destroyed T-34s at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. In the first major tank battle at the Pusan perimeter in August 1950, American armor destroyed 97 T-34s while losing only 15 tanks. The kill ratio was 5-1 in favor of the Americans. Tungsten carbide penetrators were a primary factor. The Vietnam War saw continued evolution. American M48 Patton tanks used improved APDS ammunition, armor-piercing discarding sabot, which refined Patterson's basic concept. A tungsten core surrounded by an aluminum sabot that fell away after firing. The Vietnamese didn't deploy heavy armor, so these rounds saw limited use. But American tanks in Europe, facing potential Soviet threats, carried APDS ammunition throughout the Cold War. By 1973, the Yom Kippur War demonstrated the next evolution. Israeli and Arab forces battled with modern Soviet and Western tanks. The Israelis used APFSDS ammunition, armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot, featuring tungsten penetrators with aerodynamic fins. These rounds could defeat any armor then in service. The Israeli Armor Corps achieved kill ratios exceeding 10-1 in some engagements. Tungsten remained the secret weapon. Today's M1 Abrams tank fires M829 series ammunition featuring depleted uranium penetrators, which partially replaced tungsten due to supply concerns. But many NATO forces still use tungsten-based rounds. The British Challenger 2, German Leopard 2, and French Leclerc all fire tungsten carbide penetrators as their primary anti-armor ammunition. The principles Patterson established in 1944 remain unchanged. High-density material, extreme velocity, sub-caliber design with discarding sabot, kinetic energy focused on the smallest possible area. This formula has defeated every armor innovation for 80 years. Composite armor, reactive armor, and active protection systems all attempt to counter tungsten penetrators. Some succeed partially. None have made tungsten obsolete. The total number of tanks destroyed by tungsten carbide ammunition since 1944 is impossible to calculate precisely. But conservative estimates suggest over 15,000 armored vehicles across multiple conflicts. The design that killed 340 Panthers in 1944 to 1945 has killed thousands more in the decades since, and the number of lives saved by superior anti-tank capability. The calculations become speculative, but military analysts estimate that tungsten-based ammunition prevented an estimated 50,000 friendly casualties by ending tank engagements before enemy armor could respond effectively. Patterson's miracle saved more lives after his death than during his lifetime. But the real lesson isn't about tungsten. It's about ideas that seem insane until they work. Patterson wasn't the first person to face institutional resistance. In 1940, a British engineer named Barnes Wallis proposed skipping bombs across water to destroy German dams. His superiors called it ridiculous. The bombs worked. The dams broke. In 1943, American engineers suggested mounting bazookas on aircraft to create tank-killing fighters. The Army Air Force called it desperate and crude. The P-47 Thunderbolts with rocket pods destroyed thousands of German vehicles. In 1944, a Navy officer proposed using underwater demolition teams to clear beach obstacles before amphibious landings. The Navy brass called it suicidal. The UDT teams saved thousands of lives at Normandy and beyond. Patterson's tungsten carbide penetrator joined this list of rejected innovations that changed warfare. The pattern is consistent. An individual with specialized knowledge sees a solution. The bureaucracy rejects it as impractical, expensive, or risky. A crisis forces reconsideration. Testing proves the concept. Mass production follows. Victory validates the innovation. Then history forgets the individual while remembering the weapon. This pattern continues today. Modern military innovation faces identical resistance. Unmanned drones were dismissed as toys in the 1990s. Now they dominate reconnaissance and strike missions. Stealth technology was called a waste of resources in the 1970s. Now it's standard for frontline aircraft. Guided munitions were criticized as too expensive in the 1980s. Now conventional bombs are obsolete. The lesson is simple, but hard to implement. Organizations naturally resist change because change threatens established systems, budgets, and careers. The people who benefit from current systems will always argue against new systems. Overcoming this resistance requires evidence, persistence, and often a crisis that makes the status quo untenable. Patterson had all three: evidence from his metallurgical research, persistence through bureaucratic rejection, and a crisis in the form of Panthers slaughtering American armor. Without any of these elements, HVAP would have remained a laboratory curiosity. With all three, it changed the war. The question for modern organizations, military or civilian, is whether they can recognize good ideas before a crisis forces their hand. Can innovation happen proactively instead of reactively? Patterson's story suggests the answer is usually no. Bureaucracies need to see failure before accepting change, but occasionally someone like Captain Hederman emerges, someone with authority who recognizes potential and cuts through red tape. These individuals are rare and invaluable. They turn ideas into reality years faster than normal processes allow. And there's one final detail most people never learned. In 1978, when David Patterson received the Army's letter about his father's work, he found something unexpected among his father's papers. A journal entry dated May 9, 1945, the day after VE Day. Dr. Patterson had written, "Germany surrendered yesterday. The radio says the war in Europe is over. I should feel triumphant. The HVAP worked. We destroyed hundreds of enemy tanks. We saved American lives. But I keep thinking about the German crews. Boys like our boys, probably. They died in flames because I figured out how to make tungsten punch through steel at 300-400 feet per second. Is that something to celebrate? I designed a better way to kill people. Yes, they were enemies. Yes, our men would have died instead. Yes, ending the war faster saved lives overall. I know the logic. I know the necessity. But late at night, I remember the ballistics tests. The captured Panther we fired HVAP into. The tungsten core fragmented exactly as designed. Inside that tank, there would have been 5 men. The fragments would have killed them all in seconds. I made that happen. I'm not sorry. I'd do it again. American tankers deserved a fighting chance. But I'm not proud either. Pride seems wrong. I'm just tired." David Patterson published this entry in a military history journal in 1982. It changed how historians viewed HVAP development. Patterson wasn't a glory-seeking scientist. He was a man who understood the moral weight of his work. He'd created a weapon of devastating effectiveness and felt the burden of that creation. This complexity makes his story more powerful, not less. Patterson did what was necessary during a desperate war. His tungsten miracle saved American lives while ending German lives. Both truths coexist. Celebrating the innovation doesn't require ignoring its cost. And this final twist reveals something profound about all wartime innovation. The scientists, engineers, and inventors who create better weapons rarely do so from bloodlust or patriotic fervor. They do so from professional competence and the knowledge that their side needs advantages to survive. The moral complexity weighs on them privately, while publicly they accept credit for success. Patterson's private doubts don't diminish his achievement. They humanize it. From a 34-year-old metallurgist with a crazy idea about shooting tungsten at tanks to a weapon that destroyed 340 Panthers and evolved into the armor-piercing standard for 80 years. Dr. Robert Patterson proved that innovation often comes from unexpected places, faces institutional resistance, and succeeds through persistence and crisis. And because of his work, thousands of American tank crews survived encounters that should have killed them. That's the power of one person who refused to accept that Panthers were invincible. The tungsten miracle didn't win the war alone. No single weapon ever does. But it changed the balance of armored warfare at a critical moment when American tankers were dying in numbers that couldn't be sustained. It gave them a fighting chance. Sometimes that's all anyone can ask for. The next time you hear about a crazy idea that everyone dismisses, remember Dr. Patterson. Remember that the M93 HVAP was called impossible, wasteful, and impractical, right up until it started punching holes through Panther armor at 600 yards. Remember that the difference between a crazy idea and a revolutionary innovation is often just someone willing to test it. And remember the German Panther tanks, those 45 tons of steel and firepower that terrorized Allied armor in 1944. They weren't defeated by bigger tanks or better tactics. They were defeated by 19 pounds of tungsten carbide traveling at 300-400 feet per second, designed by a man most people never heard of, fired by crews who knew exactly what it meant to finally have a weapon that worked. That's how wars are won. Not just with courage and sacrifice, though both matter desperately, but with innovation, persistence, and the willingness to try something insane when everything else has failed. The tungsten miracle proved it. And 80 years later, every armor-piercing round still follows Patterson's formula. Some legacies are measured in medals and monuments. Others are measured in the lives saved by an idea nobody believed in until it was too late for the enemy to stop it. Dr. Robert Patterson's legacy burns in the wreckage of every tank destroyed by tungsten since 1944. And that's a monument no one can ever tear down.